The Formula One World Championship is brought to you on Eurosport by Ford, Formula One's most successful team. Hitachi. Elf Oil, World Champion. Coca-Cola. And Goodyear.
Welcome from Interlagos. Hello, welcome on Eurosport from John Watson and Allard Cow. We're 3.5 minutes away from the morning warm-up, and it is nearly 8:30 local time in Brazil, with, as we can see on our screen, a wet circuit. It's windy, look at the flags, but also, John, it's funny weather here in Brazil, because if we look out of our commentary position, we can see a bit of blue sky.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Ella. There is blue sky. There is high cloud. Fortunately, the cloud that we saw in the second qualifying session on Saturday afternoon isn't around us, but here in Brazil, at this time of year, anything is possible. But for this 30-minute session, the bulk of it is going to be on a wet track in parts. It will dry out. It tends to dry fairly quickly. But right now, the ambient temperature, not anywhere near as warm as it was on Friday or on Saturday.
Pole position for the first Grand Prix of the 1994 Grand Prix season has gone to Ayrton Senna. His 63rd in his Grand Prix career and his first for the Rothmans-Williams team. Alongside him for the third time on the front row, he did it before in Monaco last year and Spain 92, is Michael Schumacher. Two-time Grand Prix winner. Of course, he races for Benetton. The second row, Jean Alesi, equaling his best qualifying performance, and Damon Hill, and then John, fastest of the newcomers, Heinz-Harald Frentzen in 5th position.
Mercedes-Benz and Sauber are delighted with Heinz-Harald. He's done a great job for them. His first Grand Prix on a strange circuit, and in fact the entire Sauber Mercedes-Benz team very happy indeed with the overall performance. A very part of that team, and in fact during a dinner they held last night for the media, that expression of pleasure was just hidden all the time, but you could see little grins at the side of the mouth. They don't want to appear overconfident, but they've every reason to believe they can get a very good result here this afternoon.
Gianni Morbidelli in 6th position, and if we talk about surprises, I think that's a surprise in the top 10.
I think it's a relief as well, because a week ago the footwork team did have a lot of problems during testing with this new Ford HP engine chassis. They came here really one of the teams that well short of testing time, and the car has been quick throughout the weekend. Fittipaldi likewise, the teammate of Gianni Morbidelli, and another team that really, going back to the Ford HP engine, we keep talking about that little engine, but it is such a good package.
Well, the morning warm-up. Usually cars would run on full tanks and people would try and find out what tyre was like, what performance was like. And we've got 30 seconds to go to the morning warm-up. But John, I think the big question here in Brazil, and probably for the whole of the 1994 season, is what's a full tank?
I don't think there is a full tank in this paddock. I think most drivers, teams, cars are going to be running at maximum in the first part of the race around 100 litres. There are people that will definitely go for a race strategy of just one stop. In fact, that is the quickest way if you work it out on paper. But in reality, the two-stop stop is probably going to be the norm. And personally, I wouldn't be surprised to see more than 2 stops. If you have 3 stops, it may not necessarily be that fuel as well as tyres will be taken on board. It may be that there are 2 stops for fuel, but 3 for tyres. Whatever it is, nobody is telling us. No one is even thinking about discussing it openly. You go into any of the team garages, the doors in the rooms are shut, and that's what the strategy is going to be, very, very closed.
Well, we've gone through the top 6 while everybody has taken the track. If we look at right the other end of the grid, non-qualifiers here this weekend are Paul Belmondo in the Pacific and Roland Ratzenberger in the Simtek. And on the very last row of the grid, we got the two new teams. Pacific in 25th with Bertrand Gachot, and Simtek in 26th position with David Brabham. So both the new teams, John, having in one car apiece.
And I think all credit should go to Pacific and Simtek. They've really battled against the odds to become Formula One teams. They are both probably quite short of the kind of budgets that you need to run fairly comfortably through a season, but they're working hard on finance. Bertrand Gachot qualified, David Brabham qualified, and I'm sure they both went to bed last night thinking they've done a very good job, as have everybody in those two small new teams.
So we can see the track being wet but drying up. There we see dry patches, and well, usually drivers come in after one lap, but I would not be surprised to see drivers as to go out on slicks fairly soon, John.
Well, there's still a fair amount of water on parts of the circuit, and certainly for your first lap, as we see Ayrton Senna do, this is generally an exploratory lap. You go out, you come back in and allow the teams to have a quick look around the car. This is the first time they've had a run since the qualifying on Saturday afternoon. How long it will be before somebody is courageous enough to find out what conditions are like on slicks. As I said a few moments ago, although the track isn't wet, it is still sufficiently wet and treacherous to catch those out, and with the ambient temperature still relatively low, the drying period, which normally here in Brazil is very fast, is that little bit slower at the moment. But you do see a lot of dry patches around the circuit. Senna gingerly threading his way through there. There's no reason for him to be rushing at this point. He will be back into the pits, and in 10 minutes there will be a distinct dry line all around the circuit.
Ayrton Senna, who took pole position with a 1:15.962, and that's a tenth of a second slower than Alain Prost did last year. But of course Ayrton's second run, well, that never appeared because the rain came some 40 minutes into the qualifying session yesterday. So Ayrton not having had a run on his second set of slicks. Ayrton on pole position by 0.3 of a second in a car, John, that's basically very new indeed and has had very little running.
In fact, the team that's had the benefit of most running in the off-season has been Benetton Ford. And they took a very conscious decision in the middle of last year to ensure that their car was out well in advance of the season. And of course, they paid dividends. They're very close indeed to Williams-Renault in qualifying. And Michael Schumacher all the happier for it.
And there we saw Jos Verstappen coming into the pits, qualifying 9th, and he qualifies 9th. A very good performance in your first Grand Prix in what is only his 53rd start in a racing car. That's another team that's impressed most people. It's impressed me anyway, John. The Tyrrell team, very quick on Friday morning. Then I think they lost their way a little bit, but Katayama qualifying in 10th and Mark Blundell qualifying 12th. That's better than they did last year, I think.
Well, I think you and I can be quite easily impressed, Allard, as we sit here watching it on the TV screens. More importantly is Yamaha, the engine supplier to Tyrrell. And they said last night that they didn't realize the value of continuity. This is the first time in Yamaha's Formula One career that they've had more than 1 year with one team. And they realize now continuity is very important indeed. They're also delighted with the Harvey Postlethwaite team-designed Tyrrell chassis. It's a sensible car. The objectives Postlethwaite laid out for his design team was a straightforward, uncomplicated, easily driven and set up car, and one that would be a low maintenance car. They've achieved that. They've also got a very competitive car, and also the Yamaha, the V10 engine, developed in conjunction with John Judd, showing it has got now comparable horsepower to their competitors.
Michael Schumacher in the Benetton Ford following a Ferrari, and talking about Ferraris, Jean Alesi, of course, qualifying on the second row of the grid, but Gerhard Berger not having a happy time. Brazil has not been his year or his place for the last 2 years. Last year he qualified 13th. This year he's in 17th position.
But it was his teammate at Ferrari, Jean Alesi, who really rose the hearts of all the Italian team and the vast Italian press corps that comes to all Grand Prix somewhere, and no one knows quite where. Maybe he found a shortcut around the circuit, but he did a time that really was just considered out of the question. It was 3/4 of a second quicker, and that was done in a session which was not generally considered to be particularly quick than the car had done at any point over the weekend. And Jean just gets out of the car nonchalantly and smiles. Well, I did my best.
Well, he certainly did. There we see Senna and Hill, both still on wet weather tyres, going out for their second run, and with some 6 minutes into the session. Well, will it be like this just after 1 o'clock local time? Damon's got it all to do, I suppose.
Well, I talked to one of the organisers this morning, and they said they had actually requested rain for 1:22 this afternoon. They said something went wrong, it's arrived early. So maybe that's a good omen for this afternoon's Grand Prix. With the new strategy with refuelling, having a maverick aspect in the race, I like rain. I think it might be just too much for the teams to contend with here in Brazil this afternoon. I'm looking forward to a dry race. I'm sure most teams will also feel that. But of course there are those teams that are capable of mixing, refueling, tyre stops, whatever, with a wet race. It'll certainly play to the favour of 1 or 2 people I can think of.
I think you're looking at one. Well, that's a lot of talk has been about the refueling rigs in the pits. There we see mechanics, team managers, everybody wearing fireproof overalls, and it makes it quite colourful down in the pit lane. Senna going into the pits, and I'll bet you Senna's gonna get slicks, John.
It would be a fairly courageous thing to do, but it would be a very sensible thing to do. Senna's not going to learn anything now on the circuit and wet weather tyres. He might as well do what has always been said to do. The time you think you should be going in is the time, in fact, you should actually be in the pit lane. And Senna being pushed back into the garage, and I'm quite sure that when he reappears, he will be out on slicks.
Fastest so far is Michele Alboreto on a 1:31.982, and those times will get quicker as we go through the session. Mark Blundell second, and Katayama Gasho, and they're all the drivers who've done 3 or more laps. Michele Alboreto, incidentally, although he only qualified in 22nd position, was one of the stars of yesterday morning, when he suddenly appeared in 3rd position, but then had an engine problem.
And in fact, that time, 1:17.818, would have been good enough to put him on 5th place on the grid. And Giancarlo Minardi really, I think, had hopes of being in the front of a grid for this Grand Prix. Very disappointed not to be, but he was so proud of his little team. They're now part of Scuderia Italia. There's an amalgamation of those 2 Italian teams at the end of last year. This is still the 93 car. They've got a 94 chassis, which they hope to have by the time he returns to the early European races. And things look very positive for Minardi, Scuderia Italia.
So, Damon Hill on his first flying lap's gone to the top of the list. Surprise, surprise. And Gerhard Berger has done 3 laps, and that's the most Gerhard's done in 1 row, I think, all weekend. And there we see the list going through the screen with Mika Häkkinen in the top 10. And John, although the Peugeot engine might not be what they want it to be at the moment, the McLaren chassis might not be at what they want it to be at the moment, but Mika loves these conditions.
Well, I mean, when I was referring to certain teams really looking forward to an even more complex equation in terms of stops, weather, etc., McLaren was the team I had in mind, and they are more than capable of dealing with any eventuality. Well, Senna out on wets again.
Well, can't let them ride all the time. the situation.
I'm surprised that he's done that, because the circuit is beginning to dry quite quickly. The sun is getting warmer. We can feel it here, even in our commentary position, as the clouds have pulled back. So I think he'll be back in at the end of this lap.
We're going to have a break here on Eurosport, and then we're back with a warm-up from Brazil. You're watching Bertrand Gachot, the only Pacific that made it to the race. He is on slicks, and Bertrand Gachot is currently the fastest driver out on the circuit. Gachot, then Damon Hill, Michele Alboreto, Gianni Morbidelli, Gerhard Berger is 5th, Hakkinen 6th, 7th Eric Comas, 8th Rubens Barrichello, 9th Oliver Panis, and in 10th position Heinz Harald Frentzen. But judging by the speed of Bertrand Gachot, I think slicks might well be the way to go.
Well, I have to say I agree, Allard. The circuit, most parts now, certainly the critical parts, appear to be sufficiently dry, and I really am amazed that Senna stayed out for a further lap, and I don't know what he feels he's learning from this. The conditions, as Bertrand Gachot is making pretty clear, and now Heinz Harald Frentzen is topping the list, is swinging over to favour slick weather, slick tyres.
Well, I think every time now someone crosses the line, he'll top the list. Frentzen currently on a 1:29.770, some 12 seconds away from his qualifying time, and there we can see it's getting drier and drier. Well, Mr. Verstappen, a quick career into Formula One, and although there's quite a few Dutch journalists around here who are very disappointed that he's in 9th position and, let's say, 1.8 seconds away from Michael Schumacher, well, I think I'm the only one of the Dutch people who thinks he's done a brilliant job.
I've had funny reactions, Allard. A lot of people have said it's an outstanding achievement with the limited amount of racing experience he has. On the other hand, some other people are saying, well, he's never been closer than 2 seconds to Schumacher anywhere, so maybe he's not that good after all. And, you know, it's those sort of comments I think are rather negative ones. It's not fair. The guy is very young. He's got enormous responsibilities and pressures on him. And I'm quite sure that when he has his first Grand Prix, and I'm sure he'll make it to the end, he will be a much more complete Grand Prix driver, racing driver, not Grand Prix driver.
Well, let's not forget, John, he's only 21 years of age.
Same as Rubens Barrichello. He was 20 when he had his first Grand Prix.
So, Frentzen still fastest than Gachot. I think the Pacific team will probably take a picture of this. Then it's still Damon Hill, that time from a couple of laps ago. Damon now back into the pits. Alboreto, Morbidelli is 5th. Gerhard Berger is 6th. 7th, Mika Hakkinen. 8th, Christian Fittipaldi. Then it's Oliver Panis, another man in for his first Grand Prix start. And in 10th position, Eric Comas. And there's a man, Martin Brundle, who has not been a happy man. Well, Christian's father is looking a bit worried.
Well, Wilson always has that look on his face these days when he's had a Grand Prix with his son. And dads who've been Grand Prix drivers, who've now got sons who are Grand Prix drivers, tend to be very concerned indeed about the progress of their offspring. Sometimes that concern spills into anxiety, and we've seen on occasions Wilson being a bit excitable in the pit lane, and most understandably last year at Monza, when at the end of the Grand Prix the appalling sight of seeing Christian Fittipaldi flying upside down 15 feet above the ground at 180 miles an hour, I think any parent would feel concerned.
I think we're in for a treat here, John, watching Jean Alesi on this track on slicks in a Ferrari. And Ferrari currently the only team that's running that funny rear wing.
Well, they've put more downforce on to the car now. Whether that's to cope with what they thought would be very slippery conditions this morning, or whether they've decided to do this regardless wet or dry, we're going to have to wait and see until later in the afternoon. But Mika Hakkinen sitting in the pits, Christian Fittipaldi, and really now Fittipaldi, I think, showing the signs of the promise that his background would have indicated, and feeling very comfortable also with the footwork Ford team.
Alboreto, the fastest driver at the moment. Then Karl Wendlinger, Ukio Katayama and Heinz Harald Frentzen. Then it's Bertrand Gachot and Damon Hill. Well, they'll be followed by Gianni Morbidelli, and you can see it all on your screen here at Eurosport. But Jean Alesi, 4 seconds quicker than Michele Alboreto was.
And having to go the long and the wet way around Mark Blundell, he's going to be on very wet slicks as he enters that typical third gear corner. Have to be very tippy-toe as he entered into it. Picked up the dry line, now able to pick up the throttle. But how many occasions have we seen Alesi in these very treacherous conditions? You can see the car absolutely, the 4-wheel sliding.
Gerhard Berger has now gone fastest, 1:22.5 and a 1:22.6 for Alesi. And we see those big refueling rigs in the pit lane, and the ones at McLaren actually right underneath our commentary booth. And it's now Rubens Barrichello who's gone up into the top 4. The young Brazilian who's probably living closest to the circuit of all the Brazilian drivers, about 200 yards away. Michele Alboreto, I think he was in for the Benetton seat for a while, the second Benetton seat. Well, he didn't get that, and decided to drive for Minardi, Scuderia Italia, and he feels pretty at home at that team.
It was interesting during the period when JJ Leto and Michele Alboreto were testing for the Benetton team. JJ was consistently a second quicker than Michele Alboreto. Now, Michele did a time in the Saturday morning practice session that would have put him 5th on the grid had he done it in qualifying in the afternoon. If you assume that JJ Leto was a second quicker than Michele Alboreto, you could have arguably had a Minardi in the front row of the grid. Now, does that make sense to anybody, or does that make sense?
Well, probably makes sense to Giancarlo Minardi. Well, that's what a Williams mechanic, it's not a Pacific mechanic looks like at the moment. All in fireproof overalls. And Ayrton Senna on slicks, his first flying lap. And what is it going to be? He'll gonna find his way round, warm up the tires, and go for a time. Now, would it be that he's going to do 4, 5, 6 laps in a row now, John?
Well, he's going to stay out, I would imagine. Oh, no, he's not. He's got about another 12 minutes or so this session remaining, and he may well want to do a stop. Remember that the sets of tires, 7 sets in total, they will want to very carefully select those tires they want to use in the Grand Prix itself this afternoon. And I would imagine that in the case of Senna and in the case of Damon Hill, they will have probably 4 sets marked out. They may want to run through all 4 sets. Very limited amount of time to do that, bearing in mind the conditions at the start of this session. But they may want to go through at least 1 or 2 sets. The sets that they think they might start the Grand Prix on.
Damon Hill still got that cold. He doesn't feel too well at the moment. And, well, are we going to see a practice fuel stop? That's what I want to know. I've seen teams trying it late at night and very early in the morning, but I haven't seen anyone do it during one of the official sessions yet.
I would imagine at the end of this session, as cars return to the pits, they will have a simulated pit stop. They will put fuel in. Most of the practicing we've seen so far in pit lane has been done as a dry run. There hasn't been fuel in the practice runs.
Michael Schumacher is now fastest here in Brazil. Gerhard Berger, Ayrton Senna, Rubens Barrichello and Jean Alesi complete the top 5. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back from Interlagos. You're watching Ayrton Senna, currently second fastest behind Michael Schumacher, a 1:20.0 and a 1:20.1. Then it's Gerhard Berger, Damon Hill, Hakkinen and Barrichello completing the top 6.
just watching Senna passing Gasho, he had to go offline onto the wet part of the track. And as he came up through the uphill left-hand corner, sliding a lot, so he did lose maybe a couple of tenths. Expect this lap to be somewhere in the low 19s. Again, well, traffic, Karl Wendlinger staying well over to the left. Senna very keen indeed to emerge quickest in this session. What I'm really not sure, and I suspect Williams or Benetton for that matter aren't sure, is just how real was that gap between the Schumacher and Senna in qualifying. Benetton, Senna very, very loose at the rear of the car up the hill. But really, was Senna snowballing, or have Benetton really got that little bit more speed than they indicated? I suspect the differences are, in fact, what they appeared in qualifying, and that has only got to be a great start for the 94 season.
Well, Senna now being the fastest man during the warm-up, and I think Schumacher has gone into the pit, so he's not able to defend that. There we see it on our screen, Senna and Schumacher, then Gerhard Berger and Damon Hill. Gerhard is in the pits, Damon's still out there but had a slowish lap. Hakkinen and Fittipaldi, and there we see 7 to 12. And it's all changed again. Eddie Irvine now into 5th position. Whoa, Irish go, John.
First time at Interlagos, and Eddie Irvine very keen indeed to, well, indicate that all the talk about not being a Grand Prix driver was really just pure rhetoric on his part. Believe me, he is entirely serious about his Grand Prix career, and very good cooperation within the team between Barrichello and Eddie Irvine, and a fairly successful and very happy pre-season testing session for that team.
Well, Senna got into the pits. Barrichello on his first flying lap when he taken the track again. So it's a session that a lot of things are changing. The race this afternoon, 1 o'clock local time. So that's 6 o'clock on the continent, 5 o'clock in the UK, and it'll be run over 71 laps. And let's just hope, John, there'll be 71 dry laps.
Well, in Brazil, we never know what to expect. We saw a very sudden rainstorm during last year's Grand Prix. What we had on Saturday afternoon was a little bit more predictable. You could see it coming for quite a long time. But with the cloud around the circuit, it is building up. So rain is very possible. Hoping it won't.
Well, Gianni Morbidelli is now up to 2nd position, a 10th of a second behind Ayrton Senna, so maybe it wasn't a fluke, eh?
Well, I think the thing that you can say now about Sunday morning warm-up is that in the past you were never quite sure if all the teams were running with the amount of fuel that they would require for the race. You can believe now that nobody's running with more than 70 litres at most. Maybe one team will have 100 litres, but the majority will be somewhere between 50 and 70 litres. I believe when the race starts there will be a couple of teams trying a little bit, let's say, more risque strategy, and they may start with something like 35 or 40 litres to try and make a break, take the advantage, and then when it comes to the pit stops for tyres and for fuel, their stops are going to be out of sync with the bulk of the remaining competitors. It's a risky strategy. It may pay off for some.
Senna is fastest on a 1:19.8. Michele Alboreto is in 9th position on a 1:20.3. That's half a second for the top 9, and it's a long time since it's been that close. And while Morbidelli is in 3rd place, teammate Christian Fittipaldi is only 0.2 of a second behind in 6th position. So the Arrows team, well done.
And Damon Hill now slotting alongside Ayrton Senna as being the two quickest. Looking in, this is the new camera mount and Mika Häkkinen's McLaren Peugeot on the wing end plate. Camera position I like, but you can see the vibration. Very bumpy circuit. And that's some indication of what it is actually like to drive a car. Very often the in-car camera makes the driver's job look much, much too easy. That's a much more realistic example of what it is like.
Well, Rubens Barrichello moves up into the 119s and into third position. And we are now seeing, with 1 minute and 10 seconds to go, all the drivers that are out there at the moment will end on top. That's the thing, that's for sure. And maybe it's even a case of being the last driver to complete a complete lap.
It'll be very much the case. Jean Alesi is now splitting the two Williams in his Ferrari, 1 minute 19.872. And between Alesi, Damon Hill, Barrichello, you're talking about thousands of seconds. Three totally different cars, three totally different personalities. Formula One looks, in prospect, very exciting indeed.
There's a tyre stop for the Pacific team.
This is a practice pit stop. Gasher has been out of course on slicks. He was, I think, the first man on slicks this morning. And Mika Häkkinen currently in 10th place with his McLaren Peugeot. And the problems that the McLaren team have been having throughout the weekend has been with the throttle linkage, the mechanism they're running, of course, as everybody is, a normal cable throttle linkage rather than the fly-by-wire, which they use so successfully formerly. And they've been having a few small problems and trying to smooth those problems out.
So Karl Wendlinger has now gone top of the list in front of Mark Blundell. Then it's Senna, Alboreto, Alesi and Hill. And that was the last lap from Ayrton Senna. So that's a 1:18.667. So Ayrton faster so far, while Damon has gone into the pits. So he will not be quicker. He's currently 6th fastest. Maybe he'll stay there, who knows. Wendlinger, 2nd. Blundell, 3rd. Alboreto and Alesi. That's the top 5.
I mean, it's unbelievable. It's like a qualifying session right now here. Times literally by the second are changing. Michele Alboreto back up to where he was more or less this time on Saturday morning. Ayrton Senna 3/10 quicker than Karl Wendlinger. Great performances from Blundell, Alboreto, Alesi. Damon Hill, in the space of a minute, dropped from 2nd to 6th, down to 6th.
Well, it's the status quo at the very sharp end of the field, with Ayrton Senna again being the fastest driver on the circuit. But it's been a very surprising session. I mean, who would have thought Karl Wendlinger, Mark Blundell, Michele Alboreto and Alesi completing the top 5. So let's hope it's going to be a surprising and exciting Brazilian Grand Prix in about 5 hours here on Eurosport. Thank you for watching this morning. See you later. Bye for now.
The Formula One World Championship is brought to you on Eurosport by Ford, Formula One's most successful team. Hitachi. Elf Fuel, World Champion. Coca-Cola.